I think I approach life and professional life as I have tried to learn from everyone that I have worked with. I don't think the extra benefit of just going to law school and spending $70,000 to $100,000 a year just for a degree on your wall when you don't really have an intention to practice. Everyone's got to do what they want to do, but I don't necessarily recommend. I'm a big proponent of doing what you want to do, what you really like to do, and you'll figure out a way how to make that successful.
Yeah.
As much as you like to say, I want to map out the next 5 steps, it doesn't work that way, right? You got to take the next one. You can visualize the next couple of steps, but at the end of the day, you don't know where life is going to take you. I was interested in 3 practice areas: in real estate, litigation, and potentially bankruptcy. So I come to Kramer Levin on my first morning, fresh out of my second year, and I'm sitting in reception, and the receptionist picks up the phone. She's like, if anyone calls, Joel Zweibel is no longer at the firm. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's the guy. By this point, it's already mid-afternoon, and I'm like, I didn't bring tefillin with me. I didn't bring a bag with me. I said, I have to go home. So I called my client and said, listen, I got to go home. I think that at the end of the day, it really comes down to judgment.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Jewish Professionals Podcast, the JP Podcast. I'm Hillel Bainash.
And I'm Benjamin Winters, and we're students at Yeshiva University, just looking for some advice.
Our aim is to bring to you Jewish professionals from every industry to learn from their successes and failures, how they grew in their career and Jewish identity, and made a Kiddush Hashem along the way.
We hope you can apply what you learned through the lessons to your own life as they pass the torch to us, the next generation. We can't wait to go along this journey with you. This is the Jewish Professionals Podcast.
Woo! Welcome back, everybody, into the studio this beautiful December night. Hanukkah night. Fifth night. And, it's getting cold outside. And something, I've been really getting into as of late is cold plunges, cold water immersion. Big fan of Huberman Lab. And Ben, tell us a little bit about those benefits I know we were talking about before.
Well, number one, your heart rate just soars. That's number one, obviously. Number two, you literally can't sleep the first night you do it because you're just racing. And number three, the second after you get out of the cold plunge, if you've ever done it, you feel like you just climbed Mount Everest.
A million
twice, literally twice in that day. You feel like you can do anything. So I highly recommend it. It's a little harder in the winter because you go from cold to cold. It's not like you can reward yourself,
right.
But a cold plunge is definitely, if you're not into it yet, definitely look into it.
Have you ever tried a cold plunge?
I have not. And in fact, I'm thinking that I'm going to go Boca next week, and I'm going to take a warm plunge in the pool, and about I set it about 88 degrees. So that's where my mind's at.
There are definitely benefits to the warm plunge as well. I don't know if it's Mount Everest, maybe a different tall mountain, but that's amazing. Our guest today is none other than Michael Friedman. We are honored that he's joining us on the Jewish Professionals Podcast. Michael is a partner at Chapman and Cutler, where he leads the firm's special situations and restructuring group and heads its Israel practice. He's a Penn Law graduate and an alum of the pristine Yeshiva University. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we always like to take us back to your beginning, and I actually don't even know where you grew up, where you're from originally.
Well, before that, I think Hillel, you got to tell us we've had a connection as well.
Okay, of course. Sorry, Ben likes to take the intro, and he's actually pretty good at it, so I don't ever try to take over. But I will say that I was lucky enough to have Professor Friedman as my professor to teach us all about restructuring and distressed assets. And we actually have a great story. I don't know if you remember.
I do remember.
I think it's going in your book, if I recall.
It's definitely going in the book.
So there's actually a good mentor of mine who was on the podcast, Ms. Jules, recommended me this book called Distressed Investors Handbook. And I was, wow.
Credit Investors
Handbook.
Yeah.
I'm a little rusty.
Strike one.
Yeah, can I take the class again?
There's like 3 strikes on this one, so it's okay.
Yeah, it's
all right.
I got ejected. Anyway, so I go in and I'm so excited to tell my professor about this new book. I'm deeply through. I'm probably like halfway at this point. And I'm like, wow, look at this story. So I say after class, I'm like, Professor, you got to see this book. It's everything we're learning. And he just starts laughing. And I'm like, uh-oh, what's so funny? And like, I thought it was a good book. He goes, that is the textbook, the required textbook for the course.
No. Oh, that's like you think you're providing so much, you're gonna have this amazing ha'ara, and boom.
Flopped.
Like, yeah, we assigned about 6 chapters of that book for reading
Yeah,
this
so
semester.
at least I did the reading more than other people. It just happened to be by chance.
All right. So good to know. I'll have to keep that in mind for my next course next semester. So
Right.
make sure people are reading and know what the book is. Maybe you have to bring it to class and hold it up.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
say, "Hi, yes. Okay.
But yeah, take us back there. Tell us about.
Where I grew up. So I grew up in Montreal, Canada.
Oh, I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. So I grew up in Montreal. A little bit of a, I would say, not cookie cutter path to YU and to where I am today. I actually started out in more of a called yeshivish or black hat yeshiva, in high school. And from there, decided that wasn't necessarily where I wanted to go. And so I reached out to other community members and got a connection to Shalavim and decided that to go there after high school. So I went to Shalavim for 2 years and from there to YU, and then the rest was there. But grew up in Montreal and very fond memories of Montreal. I'm still a diehard Montreal Canadiens fan, a hockey fan. So that's something that'll never go. And I play hockey actually still. So there's still
In a league?
in a real
Wow.
Well, I mean beer league, but
Okay.
yes,
Pads or the real hockey on
full,
skates?
full,
on
absolutely,
skates.
real hockey.
So what is your
Absolutely.
take on floor hockey, which is heavily populated the Yeshiva League system? Because I know there are a lot of
It's an unfortunate fake.
It's a fraud. I agree with that. I agree.
I mean, I grew up playing it in elementary school, but at some point you got to graduate to real hockey.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
And I heard actually there's a member of this podcast who might be going ice skating a little bit later tonight.
Listen, it's an embarrassment. I have always been a wall guy. You go to the ice skating rink and everyone's doing their tricks and jumping around, and I'm,
Hanging on the wall.
hanging on for dear life, trying to. Well, I'm getting past my fear tonight, so it's actually pretty crazy that you said that.
All right.
And for a beer league, is there like a limit of how many beers you have to drink before the game? At least 3.
I do not drink any before or after, but it's a bunch of guys who have to go to work the next day. So we hopefully most people get the memo, but some people don't, and they get a little crazy.
They get a little too.
Is
great.
there a guy who has ever just laid someone out and like?
Unfortunately, yes.
That's unbelievable. He's like he did not have a good day at his 9
Can
to
you
5.
imagine walking into work the next day with that bruise and you're like, so like what happened to you? A bear or this or that? You're like, no, just my hockey league. I got decked.
It's happened. It's happened.
Were you ever the initiator of that deck?
No, I'm too small. I try to skate around people.
You stick to scoring the hat tricks.
We try.
So back then, also Montreal, you are. I know now they're a year below like the system. Did that play into sort of at least in Shalavim, and then when you got to YU, was that something that was going through your mind? Like you were constantly with people who were the year above you, and you wanted to maybe prove yourself. Is that something that mattered? Or?
The only thing is, I would say I did go there. So I was barely 16 when I went to. Actually, just 16 when I went into Shalavim. So
Wow.
I turned
That's
17.
young.
I turned 17 in Israel, and but it gave me the opportunity to spend an extra year without really even thinking about it. So I spent 2 years there, and then came back and kind of. It was mostly along the line. Most of my friends were actually, in the class ahead of me at YU because they were the ones that were in Israel with me. But so I didn't really feel that it was a disadvantage in any way. I felt like I had more time and the ability to do things and to take things a little slower. So I took YU. It took I ended up, I think it was 3 years or so in YU. Made a lot of great friendships and ultimately got married while I was at YU.
While you were a student.
So,
Wow.
while I was a student. Yeah. So met my wife pretty much like about six months after I got to YU, and
So
we dated throughout college, and I got married in March of my senior year.
Were you legal at your wedding? Were you 21?
Yes, I was.
Okay, I was trying to do the quick math in my head. I was going to do the quick math.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
wow. That's so you're really you're taking on the responsibility of life a lot ahead of people who are in your peer group, but also that age, which is impressive to say the least. Did that comes with like a level of expectations and needing to have direction right away?
I mean, I like to think that I thought of myself at that time as having been a very responsible person, and probably some of that is in my head and some of that was realistic. But I think that is a little bit of how I grew up. Right, I grew up in my father was a Holocaust survivor. My mother came from Morocco, or Tangiers, and she was Moroccan. So difficult childhoods, and they came to a foreign country and built. And so one of the things that my father instilled in me was responsibility and independence. And so to me it was almost second nature, and I took that on pretty easily. Although of course, as you don't earn a lot as a college student, so thankfully my parents were helped us out a little bit earlier in life. But other than that, in terms of living day to day and being responsible and married, I felt like that I was up for the challenge.
Right. Do you have any early mentors or early experiences that kind of shaped the way you viewed the workforce or viewed being professional?
I can't say that there's any particular mentor. I think I approach life and professional life is I have tried to learn from everyone that I have worked with. And so, in school, obviously you have your professors, and tried to learn as much as I could from them. And then when I entered the workforce, really tried to look at people that were ahead of me and see where they were, what they were doing, and how they approached things, and learn from them. And I think I've really tried to use that throughout my career, I would say. So, obviously, I take a lot from my father, as I said before, and I think, the kind of the building blocks. But after that, it was really, I think just learning from your environment and, talking to people and approaching it, basically from even when I was in law school, trying to find out, well, what are good firms, what should I do, how do I, what do we focus? So, I reached out to people 2-3 years ahead, and kind of pick their brain, and then when you start your career as a young associate who barely knows anything, right? I just kind of started talking to people and how they learned, how they progressed, what was important, and tried to basically build off of that.
So were you a shoe-in to the law path, or it kind of came about just by nature? The end of school was coming up. You're like, I don't really have a direction. Take me through how you did that.
Well, it was a process of elimination because you only have 3 choices in life, right? You have lawyer, doctor, and accountant.
Said every good Jewish mother.
So my brother is a doctor, and I was like, I don't want to do that. And I was like, accountant's too much math. And so I said, you know what, law seems good. But in all honesty, it was at least back then. Now I think people feel that they had more choices. But and I'm not saying that those were the only choices, but for a lot of people, it was 3, 4, 5 choices, right, in terms of career choices. And looking at the different choices and what I thought I liked, I could see myself as a lawyer. I liked the challenges. I liked puzzles. I liked logic. And basically, once I got to YU from Israel, I pretty much knew I wanted to go to law school, and I said, okay, I need to major in something that's going to be good, and I'll learn something and give me some building blocks, but allow me to get to law school.
Mm-hmm. Wait, so can I pause right there? Because those are all like the classic secured pathways in a career. And nowadays you see people getting out of college or not even going to college, and you see a ghostwriter. You see someone who started a startup. You know
a ghostwriter?
I do know a ghostwriter, actually.
You do?
Shout out to Josh Shapiro. Check out his content. He's
if he's
amazing.
a ghostwriter, you're not supposed to say his name.
He ghostwrites for companies on LinkedIn. There are all these new different paths that are not like the classic standard path that the Jewish mother is probably like, don't get into. How do you feel about having gone like the traditional path, maybe seeing people getting into those like right away? Or you would say more stick to the secured and then maybe niche out?
Look, I don't have a view on that. I think people should do what they feel comfortable with. And people come to me all the time and say, should I go to law school? And I say, well, do you want to be a lawyer? And they're like, well, I don't know. And I said, well, then figure it out, right? You don't go to law school and then try to figure out if you want to be a lawyer. People did that back in the day. And in my day, actually, there were a lot of people who said, I don't know what I want to do. I'll go to law school. And it was cheaper, and maybe their parents or whatever were paying for it, and so you could do that. But And there was at the time, I would say, people would say, "Yeah, you know what, a law degree is valuable and you can use it anywhere you want." I don't subscribe to that today.
Really?
I think that, look, I think at YU especially, you're developing your skills, your logic skills, I don't think the extra benefit of just going to law school and spending $70,000 to $100,000 a year just for a degree on your wall when you don't really have an intention to practice, everyone's got to do what they want to do, but I don't necessarily recommend it.
So what should a student do if he's graduating, he doesn't know what he wants, what it is he wants to pursue?
I would say if you really don't know what you want to do, just find somebody or something and say and find a way in to an entry level or an internship or something to experience it.
Got it.
So a lot of people, worked as paralegals or interned in law firms to see just to experience it, see what's it like. There was a point in my career, that I didn't know what I wanted. There was a point where I said maybe I was, thinking about doing something outside the law. And so I had a good friend who was at a hedge fund, and I spent some time with him and really trying to understand what the hedge fund life was like, and ultimately said, you know what, that's not what I want. And I ultimately chose a different path, which we could talk about afterwards. But and back into law, I'm a big proponent of doing what you want to do, what you really like to do, and you'll figure out a way how to make that successful.
Yeah.
I tell my kids that I tell that to my kids. I tell that to anybody who comes into my office for, just don't do something because you think that's a path to making money. There are a lot of, unfortunately, miserable professionals that I come in contact with any day, and it's like they chose it because they thought that was a kind of secure path, as you were saying, and then it's just not something they want to do, right? And I can understand it, depending on what you're doing, depends on what you like. It's not for everybody. Right. And I'm thankful. I really enjoy what I do. I think I conveyed that in class that, I really enjoy what I do, and I work incredibly hard, but I really enjoy it. And so, but if you don't, it becomes a miserable existence. It doesn't matter how much you're making.
Yeah, I agree. We have this one professor, and she just doesn't really understand investment banking. So we were explaining to her how it works, and she was doing the math. I don't understand. They're not even making so much money per hour. They're just working so many hours. I'm like, yeah, that's how it goes. Yeah. She was in shock that people would put themselves through that.
Yeah. No, but again, that's it. Yeah. So if you don't like being an investment banker and you're working, 100 hours a week, you're miserable.
Right. That's your whole life.
You're miserable. So you gotta, there has to be a balance, and you have, for me, the most important thing is find something that you enjoy doing and then try to figure out how to get better at it, how to use that, how to advance, how to use it to build something, to buy something, to do something, to advance it, and ultimately, if that's what you want to do.
Yeah. What was it? Was it a point of emphasis for you to go to an Ivy League law school coming out of YU?
I think anyone choosing law as a career, if you want to practice at, in big law, what they call today, in my day it was just, big law firms, but, it's by definition, a much easier path. It's not the only way, but getting into a top law school, generally gets you that ticket to working in larger firms. So my focus at that point was doing as well as I can and getting into the best law school that I could, and ultimately, thankfully got into Penn, and move on from there.
I think it's interesting because I met with someone who went to Penn Law the other week. I think she runs, I'm forgetting if it's the Shalom Task Force or another organization. I think it's the Shalom Task Force. And she said, along the lines of what you were saying, she tried an internship in big law and just didn't like it. But she was in Penn, and she was with a lot of people who were going to these big law jobs. And she said, I'm going to do something that I love, even coming out of here, which was working around the topics that the Shalom Task Force deals with. Like domestic violence issues at home. And she said that's where she really found her passion, and that's where she's been able to make it and be successful. So you're right. It's not even a linear path, even from what they call the T14 schools, right? For I did my homework from law school. You can still find that path within the good schools to do what you love.
Absolutely. And look, first of all, even in law, there are so many different paths, right? Everyone thinks, oh, the big law. But big law is like, I don't know what the percentage is, but it's a very small percentage of lawyers across the country. There are many other paths. There are many other jobs, that you can use that law degree and practice law in-house, in smaller firms, in mid-sized firms, in real estate, there's so many different paths. And at the end of the day, I also tell you, you're really young. You guys are really young. You, as much as you like to say, okay, I want to map out the next 5 steps. It doesn't work that way, right?
Right.
You got to take the next one. You can visualize the next couple of steps, but at the end of the day, you don't know where life is going to take you, and a lot of it is a combination of putting yourself in the right place at the right time, being open, and asking 1,000 questions, and bothering people until they kick you out, and just learn from people, because you really don't know, right? You have no idea. Someone's like, where do you see yourself 10 years from now? It's a great interview question, but at the end of the day, you don't know what you want to be, where you're going to be 10 years from now. And if someone would have asked me, like, oh, do you want to do it? You want Israel practice? Like, maybe, but like, I don't know. Like, that's not. It just. But these things happen, right? They're building blocks, and you take one step and then another step, and then a path opens up this way or that way, and you have choices to make. But to try to map that out 20 years ahead, 10 years, it's just it's futile.
That's incredible advice, by the way. I appreciate that a lot. And you moved in ultimately. Your break into big law was a firm called Kramer, Levin, Naftali's, and Frankel.
Yep.
Are every single name on there Jewish? I mean, it has to be, right?
Kramer,
Naftali's,
It sounds like a yeshiva.
Of the big law firms, it was one of the more Jewish firms. I can't say that that's why I chose them. I interviewed there, and I chose to go there primarily because it was at that time a big firm, but not a huge firm. It was about 100 lawyers, right? So now that's a small firm, but
what's considered big today? How big?
Oh, thousands.
Thousands, right?
Yeah.
Across like continents, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, it's just, they're huge. So, I mean, I work at a quote unquote big firm, and we have 300 lawyers. So we're on the smaller side of the big firms.
Right.
But,
Right.
I think Kramer Levin now, they just merged. I think they're a few thousand, So, but at the time, they had about 100 lawyers. And for me, I was looking for something that was not, a huge, firm, but very sophisticated. And again, this was pre-internet, so right, we didn't know anything. Like we literally, we had books in the library where we would, open them up, and like there would be a page for every firm written by who knows who, right? Some guy or girl, who went there, a year or two ago. And there would be some statistics of, they have, this, and there's this many people, and this is what they do, and you're really like, all right, maybe I'll interview there, and maybe I'll interview here. And so ultimately you develop a list of, 10 firms or 15 firms that you want to target. And Kramer Levin was on the list because it was, not small, but not humongous. And they had practice areas that I thought I'd be interested in, both of which I didn't go into. So I summered there. I was a summer associate. They made me an offer, and that's how I ended up there.
Is there a story in that summer, or maybe at the start, where you said, I'm cut out for this, this is what I love, or the exact opposite, like, should I be in this?
No, I wouldn't say either one of those. I mean, the story is that, again, you plan things and it's just ridiculous, right? So one of the main reasons why I picked Kramer Levin was I was interested in 3 practice areas. I was interested in real estate, litigation, and potentially bankruptcy. So they had the head of the bankruptcy group was this guy, and I said, oh, he's like a very well known, like one of the fathers of bankruptcy, and so on and so forth. And so I come to Kramer Levin on my first morning, and fresh out of out of my second year, and I'm sitting in reception, and the receptionist picks up the phone. She's like, if anyone calls, Joel Zweibel is no longer at the firm. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's the guy. So like my first morning was a little chaotic, and then I'm like, well, what's going on? So apparently a group of the bankruptcy lawyers, a few partners, including the head of the group, left that day or the day before.
Wow.
And
There was no Twitter to read about it.
So, which was like at first very concerning, but ended up being amazing because a younger group of partners, who kind of took over, they stayed, they took over, and it was kind of like, all right, everyone in, roll up your sleeves, let's go. And I ended up working a ton with that group this summer, even though that wasn't necessarily my plan. I wanted to do some real estate, I wanted to do some litigation, and worked with them. It just so happens that it was a very high concentration of from Orthodox people in that group. The head of the group was from at one point, like we were working on a matter a year later, and when I joined them full time, and I'm like, wait a minute, we're all like 5 of us on this matter, and we're all going away for Rosh Hashanah. What is going to happen?
That's
on this deal?
awesome. Wow.
It's like, you go to Rosh Hashanah in Australia, you go to Israel, I'll stay here, and we can all pick up each other's work.
Yeah. So it ended up being a little bit chaotic in the beginning, but ended up kind of being an amazing experience. And I worked with the group all summer. I did 90% of my work was with them. I was trying my hardest to get a real estate assignment because I really wanted to do real estate. At the end of the summer, they made me an offer, and I said, and you get to pick, they said, well, which group do you want to go into? I said, I really didn't get a chance to work with the real estate group. I'd love to at least try. And they're like, well, we're in the middle of a big recession right now, and the real estate group is not too busy. So how about bankruptcy? And I'm like, after a couple back and forths, it's like, okay, it sounds like bankruptcy is the way to go here, and ended up in the bankruptcy group. So
Wow.
and took it from there.
And just explain what exactly is restructuring, because obviously that's the bulk of what you're doing within.
So so it used to be called bankruptcy. That's the first thing. When back in the day, it was bankruptcy, and bankruptcy really meant companies couldn't afford their debt or got out of hand and had issues, and they filed for bankruptcy. They filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is a court proceeding in special court called bankruptcy court. And your creditors come in, and you try to work out deals with your creditors, and ultimately, after a year or two of fighting, hopefully you get to a deal and a plan, and you go to the court, you approve the plan, and great. And so that was the norm, and it was called bankruptcy groups. After a while, a lot of the work started becoming pre-bankruptcy or alternative to bankruptcy. And so the wise men and women of the world said, hey, let's not call our group bankruptcy group. We're going to call ourselves a bankruptcy and restructuring group. And because we really do a lot of work outside of bankruptcy court, right? And so it's where you negotiate, right? You have like we did in class, right?
Yeah.
We role played a situation where you have a company that's in default and needs to deal with its lenders, or maybe multiple sets of lenders and creditors. And how do you deal with that? And how do you negotiate it? And what happens? And you're doing that in the shadow of if things go badly, then you may end up in bankruptcy, but nobody really wants to do that, so let's try to get a deal. So that's kind of restructuring. So that went around, so a lot of groups called themselves bankruptcy and restructuring. And then, of course, the wise men and women said, oh, that doesn't really capture what we're doing, because some people view bankruptcy and restructuring as opportunities and investment opportunities. So let's call ourselves special situations group, right? And that's that. Now our group is called the Special Situations, or SSR, Special Situations and Restructuring. And
we'll see what the wise men and women decide in a couple of years.
Exactly.
It's so funny because I'm a semester or 2 semesters behind Hilo, and literally today in class we were talking about a company taking on debt in my corporate finance class and the risks of financial distress that come with that, which is, I guess, very apropos
I'm glad and a little surprised that it's even mentioned in the class before. Because sometimes, when I come in first day, I'm like, okay, anybody know what debt is? Anybody?
That's awkward.
And it's like,
we are a business school. I mean, that's interesting. But I'll tell you what I noticed most about the class, and just what was the most fascinating to me was just how kind of fluid negotiating is. There are so many different aspects you would never think would go into a negotiation. Like, for example, who picks certain advisory board, or who picks the people that go over the accounting. Yet everything is part of that negotiation, and it's just such a tough process where you're trying to balance the needs and wants of so many different groups and so many different levels on the structure and the capital structure. So, what would you say is the most interesting part to you about the negotiations, and what could most people learn from that and take into whatever they're doing?
All right, a lot of questions there.
Yeah, just take.
So I would say, first of all, what drew me to restructuring and what draws me to restructuring now, especially for what I do right now, is it's a very strategic practice. And what I mean by that is, in other practices, let's say you're a commercial loan commercial lending attorney or transactional attorney. So someone comes to you and says, Michael, I want to buy this company, and I worked out a deal economically. I'm going to pay, $150 million, and these are the liabilities I want to take, and here's my term sheet. Draw up a contract. And I don't want to downplay it. There's a lot to go into that, and there's a lot of negotiation, and there's a lot of sophistication to it. But you're really starting from, here's the deal. Now, please advise me on how to take my term sheet and draft a contract and protect me, make sure I'm protected, and go forward. And that's kind of what a lot of lawyers do. A lot of what we do, is someone comes to me and says, I want to achieve something. I want to buy that company. I want to make a loan. I want to do something. How do I do it? Like, how do I get there? I don't have anything yet. I had a conversation with them, and I'm not sure where they're going. I don't know if this is the right person to speak to. Do I speak to the owners of the company? Do I speak to the lenders to the company? Do I speak to the board of directors? Do I speak to the shareholders? Who do I speak to, or how do I get in? And so a lot of it is strategic, right? It's like, okay, well, let's think about this together, and let's figure out, and let's build something together. And what I like about what I do is I'm much more involved in the formation of the strategy to how to transact, and where to transact, and when to transact, which is something I really enjoy. And
so it's like a pseudo-strategic consultant.
Yeah, I would say legal consultant,
Right.
and a lot of it is advice, right? It's right now, like we have a client, and they're looking to buy a pretty large portfolio of buildings, and the question was, okay, how do I do it? All right, there's a process. Do I just go back? Do I put my bid in? Can I go another way? Can I talk to the bank? Can I do which way to go? And we talk through the pros and cons, and ultimately decide on a path. Or if you're a lender, right? If you're a lender, you say, okay, I'm a lender now. I've got a problem. How do I affect what can I do? How can I affect my remedies? Do I foreclose? Do I start a lawsuit? Do I try to negotiate something? And so we walk through the pros and cons and decide, here's a path. Let's try this path. And and again, it's very fluid, as you said, right? So one day our path is, this is what we're doing, and then a roadblock comes in, like, okay, well, all right, that we can't do that, like, so now we got to find a way around the solution, all right? We got to find a solution, right? And so and that's kind of how it goes. I have a good friend and client, and it's great. And he calls me up and he's like, Michael, here's something happened or whatever it is. And I said, well, that's a problem. And so it's like, that's I said, well, here's why that's a problem. And he's like, okay, what's the solution? I'm like, you just asked me the question. He's like, okay, I'll give you 10 minutes, and then I'll call you back in 10 minutes and give me the solution. And he's laughing and not, right? Because he expects an answer, right? Yeah. It's not that, it's like, lawyers can't just say, oh, here's the problem. You can't do that, right? They want to say, okay, well, I can't do that. Then what can I do?
Right.
How do I get around that?
How much of the solution is being decisive and confident, saying this is the right way to act, versus getting the exact best way to act?
So that's an interesting point. So I think it's a little bit of balance, right? You can't just be like, all in. Let's roll the dice, and and let's go. This is the way to go. But you can't, I think, to be an effective advocate, you can't say, well, you can do this or you can do that. You choose, right? I think clients hate that, right? Because like, okay, I know my choices. I'm asking you what I should do. Right?
That's why they're paying you.
Yeah. And sometimes my answer is, well, look, it's your decision. But I'll say, look, here's option A and here's option B. If you're considering these factors, then option A is the way to go. And if you're considering these factors, then option B is the way to go. Sometimes they like that, and sometimes they still say, okay, what should I do? And I'll say, look, it's really your decision, but if I were in your shoes, I would choose A, right? I think that at some point, as you become more senior and people are looking to you not just to kind of do the nuts and bolts, but actually advise, they're looking for that advice. And that's what clients are looking for, right? They don't want someone to just repeat the law or tell them, give them a treatise of, here are your 17 options of what you can do. They want advice, and that's why they're paying a lot for that.
So could you explain where all the opportunity is in bankruptcy, restructuring, special situations, whatever we call it? Because I thought it's only more of like in a recession where these become like very popular. Sort of where is all this opportunity within? Because when you hear bankruptcy, for the simple, myself included, I'm just like, oh, I want to hear none of that.
Right. So look, I think what's important to understand is companies are in bankruptcy for multiple reasons, right? You can have an excellent company that that was overextended. They have too much debt. So would you buy the stock today? No, because the stock maybe has zero value, right? Because if a company is worth $100 million and it has $120 million of debt, then your stock is worth zero. So you're not going to pay anything for this stuff. But what if you could buy the company for $80 million and pay the lender, right? Or in a process where the bank debt goes away. Now you have a company that may be worth $100 million. You've paid 80 and there's no debt. So you've paid. So that's a good deal, and that's where bankruptcy comes in, right? Now, obviously, I gave you a very rosy example, and they don't come along, right? But that's where investors say, I see value, right, in a particular place. And you may recall, right, Avi Friedman came to the, I see value in something that is a building, and I can build something that through a bankruptcy that's going to be worth 1.5 times what it's worth today. Because we're going to get rid of all this debt and we're going to get rid of all these obligations and we're just going to be left with a nice, clean company. And I think that if I can control that process, right, as a lender, and make sure that the plan says that these lenders are going to end up with the company through a bankruptcy, then I can buy a loan for 90 cents on the dollar or 80 cents on the dollar and come out of the bankruptcy with something that's worth 1.5 times the debt. Right, and that's where that guy's like, I represent them, but that's where the real investors, right, and that's where they make their money.
Right, so you can't just be looking at an asset that's sort of desired, a building at Central Park that sees everything and saying, oh yeah, that's great real estate. You have to pick out of the weeds the companies that are in distress and say, you know what, like this one I'm taking a chance on. This, you really have to have a keen eye for a future that you can sort of see to be possible, where they can pay off the debt and they can start to be profitable again.
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's a nuts and bolts analysis, right? You start up, it's a bottom up analysis. You say, okay, here's the company, here's their revenue, here's their expenses, here's what they do. This is what I think the company's projections will be for the next 5 years, and now they've got all this overhang, right, which is causing problems. So if we can find a way to get rid of the overhang, and this is the company, I think that it's worth X times EBITDA, and we can move on, and that's where guys. Now again, remember how we started this conversation. I'm not a math guy, okay?
Right.
That's why I'm a lawyer.
The math found you.
I wish if I was a math guy, then maybe I would be doing that. And I'm a lawyer, right? So I rely on my clients to do that, and then they'll come to me and say, okay, I like this company. I think it's, I think that, in a process, I can do X, Y, and Z. How do we get there, right? Or, again, and that's where, so that's where I would come in. But I can't do the analysis and say, that's a good company. We should go after that. Maybe one day, maybe in my retirement, that's what I'll do. But for now, that's not what I do.
Right.
Looking back on so many of the cases you've worked on, are there any particular stories that stand out? I know I've had the privilege to hear some incredible ones about, I forgot his name, the Hasidish guy. That was unbelievable.
Uncle.
Yeah. And some that really stand out and teach a lesson about people that you learned through this stressful process.
Well, can I start with a funny story first?
Oh, we love jokes. Here we go.
So one of my favorite stories of my career is my client was buying a company and bankruptcy. And oftentimes when a company is in bankruptcy, they don't have money, right? They don't have money to operate. So our client not only was going to buy the company, but also was going to provide a loan to the company in bankruptcy, which we call a DIP loan. And that's a loan that has to be approved by the court, and it gets, gets priorities and all kinds of rights and so on. So my client was buying this company. It was bankruptcy in Atlanta, and the hearing on the DIP loan was in Atlanta. That was when we still had to go physically into court, which doesn't happen that often anymore. So I picked myself up, got on a flight, got to Atlanta, and it was supposed to be in and out. So I didn't pack a bag. I didn't pack anything. I just assumed I was coming home. Anyway, we get to court, and the judge is giving us a really hard time. And the judge is like, I'm not approving this loan. I don't like these provisions. I need you to do X, Y, and Z. And I call my client, and she's like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm like, okay. So I said, look, the judge is not going to approve it. She's like, well, let's see what happens. But we can negotiate it. But I'm not agreeing to that. So I go back to the judge and I say, Judge, it's your decision. But if that's the court's decision, my client's not going to provide the loan. And he's like, I heard that from everybody. You guys are going to do it, and you guys go out and negotiate it. And I said, okay, fine. So I got out, and I'm like, by this point it's already late afternoon, mid-afternoon, and I'm like, I didn't bring tefillin with me. I didn't bring a bag with me. I said, I have to go home. So I called my client and said, listen, I got to go home. I can't stay here, and they want to negotiate this deal. We'll have an opportunity tomorrow, but I just want to make sure you're comfortable. I'm getting on a plane. I think, and she's like, do what you need to do, Michael. Go ahead. So we get out of court, and they're like, okay, let's go to our office, and we're going to negotiate this. Then I'm like, no, guys. I told the judge, we're out. We can't. We're not negotiating this. We're not doing it on these terms, and I'm going home. And they're like, yeah. And they're like, So I left the courthouse, and like a half hour later, I'm like in the Atlanta airport, and they're like, Michael, where are you? I said, I told you I'm going home. My client's not doing this deal. And they're like, come on, come to our office. We'll negotiate. It's fine. I'm like, no, I'm going home. So I hung up. I went home, then I got home. They're calling me again. Let's negotiate. I said, look, we can talk about it, or we can. They're like, well, what if we do this, and what if we did that? So that night I called the client, and we start negotiating, and she said, well, if we do this. So anyway, the next morning I called them and I said, okay, look, we're not willing to do this, but we're willing to do certain things. And they're like, well, come down and we'll negotiate and we'll have the hearing the next day. And I said, okay, fine, that's fine. So I got there, and I went back to Atlanta the next day, negotiated the deal, went back to court, got it approved, everything was fine. It's a funny story, but it gets even better because like a few years later, I'm sitting in a conference, in one of these law conferences, and I'm sitting in the back, and this guy is on the panel, and he was the lawyer on the other side. And they were talking about DIP loans, and he's like, you got to be careful sometimes when you're pushing, a lender. And I had a situation once where we were pushing a lender, and the lender didn't accept it, and and they left, and and the guy just went home, and I'm like hysterically laughing.
No way.
So like that's me, and
it was totally not because of it was you just wanted to get home.
It was like I needed to get home. I didn't have my tefillin with me. So.
You're like in your seat, like scooting.
No, I was hysterical.
That is so funny.
It's so funny. I'm turning to the guy next to me. I'm like, that's me.
He's like, no, it's not. No, it's not.
So yeah, so that's that to me is a great story. Another story I had is same client. It's funny that she was buying an Italian this huge engine manufacturer based in Italy, and they had a lot of contracts with this German company, a very large German company, and as part of our deal, if we wanted to buy the company, we had to work out like an arrangement, like a three-way arrangement with the German company and the Italian company. Now, Italians and Germans do not like each other at all. And so we flew out to Pittsburgh and in this conference center, and I was negotiating this deal, and I was essentially Henry Kissinger, the messenger between I would go to the Italians and the Germans, and this just young Jewish kid was, like the negotiator between the Italians and the Germans, and ultimately cut a deal between the two of them after two days of negotiations in this conference room. But that was a great experience.
Shuttle diplomacy. Shuttle legal diplomacy over here.
Exactly.
Shuttle legality. Yeah.
You were Jared Kushner before he was alive. What do you learn from these experiences? Like what do you learn about people? What do you learn about the art of negotiating, the art of the deal?
Well, I think in my experience, because a lot of these deals involve, you're going to have to meet people again and again, whether it's a judge, whether it's lawyers on the other side, whether it's counterparties. It starts with your reputation and your integrity, right? I have no issue taking aggressive positions for a client that at least I can stand behind. But where you are going to take things back or do things where your integrity is in question, that to me is something that is a red line. And anyone that I've experienced that with, I will treat them very, very differently, at any time in the future if I ever come across them again in a negotiation. So, I think it's important to be. It's fine to be aggressive. You need to be a straight shooter. And at the end of the day, you need to also not necessarily pound the table and tell everyone that you're the smartest guy in the room. You need to find solutions. At the end, you're there. If you're in a negotiation, you're not hired to break things up and smash things and just show everyone how smart you are. You're there to get a deal done. And so that's what you need to do. You need to focus on how do I get A and B together, right? And and you start out with people yelling at each other, and then you try to get it's like, okay, well, could you do this? Could you do that? Well, how do you feel about this? Okay, can we bridge this gap? Okay, we can't. Let's leave that to another day. Can we get these? And try to whittle away until you ultimately get to a solution. And you have to have a little bit of thick skin. I had a negotiation. This one is in Israel, and this head of a very large real estate company, and a very, very wealthy guy. Literally, I flew 6,000 miles. I get off the plane. Like the first morning, I get into the conference room. I barely sat down, and the guy looks straight at me, and he's like, you're asking me to do something criminal, and you're a criminal, and you're gonna. I'm like,
good morning.
Okay,
I haven't got to the kotel yet.
I said I just got here, and I said we all came here to try to cut a deal. And get a restructuring done out, right? And so I'm not sure what you're talking about, but let's try. And he just ranted and raved for he just went on for like 10 minutes. And I turned to the guys next to me. I'm like, are we sticking around? Like, what are we doing here? So I said, I think we should go. And they turned to my client. I said, I think we should go. I think we should leave. And they said, okay, let's go. And so we said, look, you guys take some time. We're leaving. And if you want to come back and talk, that's fine. If not, we'll get back on a plane and we'll go. And they took 10, 15 minutes, and actually more like a half hour, an hour, and came back. And then we started the negotiation. It took 2 days, and we got to a deal.
So people lose track of what they're really trying to do in the negotiation. And that is a key. Being present and really keeping your eye on the target. What am I here to do? Exactly. Not all the emotions.
And look, we all fall into. I'm not going to suggest that I don't. We all lose it at some point because we get emotional. But it's important to kind of take a step back. And even if you get upset, you got to you have to dial it back at some point and say, okay, what's the goal here? The goal is to try to get to a deal, right? And sometimes it's working on your client. Sometimes it's working on the other side. Sometimes it's both, right? Because each one comes with emotion and say, okay, I'm not doing that. That guy is. I'm like, okay, but if you want to get to a deal, these are his red lines, and are we prepared to meet that or not? And ultimately try to get to a deal. And that's what I try to do. Despite being a quote unquote bankruptcy lawyer, I really try very hard to get to a deal, to get parties to a deal, because it's nearly always way better to work out something outside of court than go to court.
That's awesome. I know you mentioned that story about going back and forth to Atlanta. You didn't have your fill-in with you. I know when people hear big law, they think about the demand of the hours, what it's going to take to make partner. How has your perspective on maybe the work-life balance question changed? And then also what you did from when you were younger to now, and maybe advice to young lawyers also.
That's a tough one because it's hard. It's a hard balance. It's especially today, with, and again, as I said, I chose my path partly because, I chose the first firm because I thought it was going to be a little bit more kinder, gentler. Now that's all a matter of perspective, right? So I still work crazy hours, but I was fortunate that when I was young and my kids were young, I worked like crazy during the week, but my weekends were generally free, and this was also in the era before the internet, and yes, there was email. I'm not that old, but still, the pressures that the immediacy that was not there at that time. So we worked very, very hard on weekends. On weekdays, and unless something was truly out of the ordinary, most weekends I was free. And so that was really when I spent the time with the kids and with their various events and their sports and really try to be there for them over the weekends. It's harder now, right? It's harder because we're on our phones, and myself included, and it's thank God for Shabbos, right? I mean, otherwise, we're on our phones, 12 hours a day, and just connected, and the clients want immediate responses, and so it eats into weekends, and so it's harder today. But I do think it's important. You got to find something, whether it's dinner time, whether it's your weekends, but you got to try to, as much as possible, find something there. You say, look, this is, unless something truly unusual, and we're all going to have to break that at some point. But for the most part, I want to be home by 6 o'clock at night, and then I'll work from 8 o'clock until midnight if I have to. But you need to find something. So for me, it worked out well. When the kids were younger, that's what I did. Now, later in life, I traveled more, and the kids were older, so it's not it's not as effective. My wife is very tolerant of my schedule now, so we're very grateful to that. But it is hard, and it's something that you really do have to find something to ground yourself, because you can get lost in it. It's something that you can just get into a grind, and it's never ending. Right.
When you're looking back into your growth of your career and your 20s, your 30s, is there anything that you think you misunderstood? Is there anything you would tell yourself, like, don't focus so much on that, it's not that important?
That's a good question. I think I come back to the same thing I said earlier, which is don't be so focused on trying to jump ahead 3, 4, 5 steps. I mean, it's going to sound ridiculous and stupid in my mind now, but like I remember when I got my LSAT score, I said, "Oh my God, I'm set." And that's the stupidest thing ever. Literally, that's the dumbest thing ever, right? Because okay, you got the next step, so you get to go to law school, right? And hopefully a good one, right? But you got to work hard in law school to get to the next step, and then getting to the next step, you can be in a law firm and still not be happy or not be productive after 2 or 3 years. So the idea that you're set, or I can map out exactly what I want to be. I think that's something that you really got to take it step by step and work hard at every stage.
Yeah, I think also, especially in our community, which you see so much success, you see so many successful people, and you have such access to them that you're just looking for that thing to say, okay, I'm like them, and I'm part of that group, and I'm done. When you realize that those people are still looking for things to move on to the next step, and realize that it's this constant growth. It's not like this level of being satiated. You have to continue to try to grow and continue to try to be the next step. That's really good advice.
No, it's a good point. Like, there's, thankfully I have good clients and they come to me, but I never feel like, oh, okay, well, I'm set now. Like, I don't have to go out and, talk to them, make sure they're happy, get new clients, because you don't know what's going to be next year, right? The person who's been giving you, work for the last 5 years, they can suddenly retire. They can suddenly go to another firm where they don't have the same level of control, or they're saying, well, no, we use this firm, right, for all our matters. And and he's calling, well, I'm sorry, I like you, but my boss is telling me that I've got to give it to those other guys. So you just don't know, right? You can't just rest on your laurels and say, okay, like I'm set, I'm good right now. And so it's constant. It's constant, and that's why, like I said, if you're not careful, it can really be overwhelming.
Right. Wow, that's incredible. And it's not something you don't really think about. You think the people, they made it, right? But everyone has a boss. Everyone has something they're trying to achieve, and most of the time they're just not complacent.
And look, when you say boss, like to me, and it's good and bad. I never felt that I had a boss, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. Like and people would say, like, "Who's your?" I'm like, well, I work for partners, right? But I don't have a boss necessarily, and I just felt like I needed to do what I need to do. I was responsible. Like I was responsible for the things I was doing, and I felt good that if I was doing what I was doing, I didn't have like a boss to make sure that he's happy. Today, it's kind of like, oh, okay, you're the boss. I'm like, no, I've got like 1,000 clients to answer to.
They're your boss now,
and they're
right?
calling me at 11 o'clock and saying, where is this and what's that? So you're always, if you're in the game, right, you're always answering to someone, right? So it's not something where you can just say, oh, well, okay, I can just coast now.
Right.
I've seen Elon Musk talk about AI and replacing maybe some entry-level lawyers. You see law school applications continue to rise every year. I don't know if this is a low-hanging fruit question, but from the top and being at the partner level, where do you see the effect of AI on maybe the entry-level jobs and then maybe the law field as a whole?
So I'll tell you that right now, it is not affecting. I think it is not affecting our hiring, and it's not a replacement. It's not viewed by any of us as a replacement for lawyers. What happens in the future, I don't know. Right, but for right now, it's not. We use AI in our firm. We have a kind of a closed system where we so I can't use ChatGPT, but we use closed systems, and for us, it's a resource, right? We use it for all kinds of whether it's summarizing things or translating. I use AI a lot to translate Hebrew documents into English, to draft certain things, but I think for us, a lot of what we do is reliant on judgment and nuance. And so, again, maybe AI will get there at some point, but for right now, it's not there. I had a conversation with a managing partner of a firm in Tel Aviv, and he actually said that they did fire junior people and replace with AI, to be replaced with AI, and he was not happy with the results. And
wow.
He said that it was probably not the right. They were struggling with that. So, look, I also am old enough to remember, computers and internet and other technologies that were going to take over, and ultimately they became tools. And I think it's going to change the way law is. There's definitely it's going to have a huge impact on how we provide services, how we price services, right? Because if you can deliver a product in 5 minutes instead of 3 hours, then you can't price yourself at on an hourly wage anymore, right? So it may be it's going to have an impact, but I think for now, it's not yet at a place where it's going to replace lawyers at this point.
Yeah.
But it can certainly replace tasks, and then lawyers are going to have to shift and do other things.
Can you take us through what you're doing now at Chapman Cutler? I know you touched on what you're doing in Israel. Just give the overall background.
What I'm doing, when you say what I'm doing right now, like what do I focus on in my practice? Or?
Correct. Yeah. Right.
So right now, I head up our Israel practice, and which means that I deal with clients that are based in Israel who are looking for U.S. advice. So I'm not an Israeli lawyer. We don't practice law in Israel, but our clients are looking either to make investments here in the U.S. or have investments here and need to either work them out or as creditors. And so I'm doing a lot of that work. I also had our special situations group, which a group of about 10 lawyers across New York and Chicago. And we do everything from, and again, this is where our special situations moniker comes in, everything from bankruptcy and restructuring all the way to VC, private equity, and M&A, and everything in between. So it's a very, very varied group, which is, I think, to me, great, and it's one of the things I really enjoy. It's a very diverse practice, and when we interview our, some associates or people that want to come in interested in our group, I'm very transparent with them. I said, look, this is a practice that is very unusual in that it is very varied, which means that on the one hand, you're going to get exposure to a lot of different things, but on the other hand, your learning curve is going to be slower because you're not going to be just a lawyer doing one very narrow thing and you're going to get really good at it. In 3 or 4 or 5 years, you could just be, leading that. Right. Because you're doing all kinds of, you can be in bankruptcy or restructuring one day or, doing a private equity or an M&A transaction, or almost litigation. We don't quite do litigation. We have litigators for that, but in disputes, or so the learning curve is a little higher. Personally, I love that. I love that. I love the diversity, but you have to have a personality that's willing to do that. Right. So I'm doing everything from right now I'm advising a client on buying a pretty large portfolio of nearly 100 buildings in Manhattan. I am advising various sets of Israeli bondholders in right now several different restructurings of companies based in the U.S. that raise bonds on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange, from office buildings to multifamily buildings to retail malls. I have clients that are making construction loans and investments in real estate in the U.S. We have clients that I'm analyzing certain investments they've made in terms of, so it's quite varied.
It sounds like you found the real estate vertical after all.
It's funny how life comes, right?
Yeah,
so I did zero real estate for about 25 years of my career, and then like boomerang, now it's a tremendous amount of my practice, and it's basically driven by two things. One, Israelis love real estate. Yeah. And so because of that Israel practice, a lot of it revolves around real estate, and a lot of restructuring now involves real estate because of the state of the world in New York and where we are right now.
Well, I heard Michael Eisenberg say recently that the Israel economy, moving to Israel right now, getting involved in their infrastructure is like moving to America in the 1800s when they were just booming. Would you agree with that sentiment?
I mean, I don't know about 1800s, but it's crazy booming right now. Like the financial sector in Israel never stopped, even through all of this. Since October 7th, there was no dip.
Wow.
It's been constant, and it's really a testament to Israelis how resilient they are. I mean, to the point where I really questioned their sanity at one point, because I remember vividly coming out of Yontiv after October 7th and, turning on my phone. And of course, the only thing I cared about was in the news and what's going on. And my WhatsApps keep going off. And I'm like, what's going on here? And these Israelis are talking about the deal. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, this is 2 days after October 7th. Okay, I know they had a little bit of time, but like, why are you talking about this deal? Like, and that's the mentality. The mentality is, as horrible as it is, and of course you get on the phone with them and you talk about it, and it's huge, right? But they can compartmentalize in a way and say, okay, but the work has to get done.
Someone's got to do it, right?
And I think Michael Eisenberg talks about how many companies were formed by reservists that were doing miluim and had an idea and would come to Tel Aviv and an office in their in their army uniform and like having a meeting about a startup.
It's amazing.
And and they have a company now. It's really I think. Michael was even talking about. I remember on a podcast I heard years ago about defense tech. He was like, "That's the next." He was talking about that. In the early days of the war, there are just so many of these, and we take it for granted. But like, a lot of my clients, I'd be trying to reach them, and I'm like, "Where were you?" And like, "Well, I was on miluim for last 30 days." And I just had a conversation yesterday with someone and said, I hadn't really heard from you so much in the last 6 months. He's like, well, yeah, I've been in the Army for most of the last 4 or 5 months.
Wow.
And these are they're 30, 40-year-old guys that you don't necessarily think of them in that way, but it's affected a tremendous amount of percentage of the society in Israel.
Yeah, and you see even with all this, you see defense, cyber, you see companies like NVIDIA investing in new campuses in Israel. You just saw last year the big acquisition of Wiz by Google. Through it all, like Israel has continued and honestly continued to grow in ways that are super unexpected.
And now it's even I went to Israel right after Sukkot, and for 2 years I've been going, and unfortunately when I get to Ben Gurion when I get to customs, I was like alone on that side. There were no Israeli passports. That line was tremendous, but when you made the right to the foreign passports, it was kind of empty. And I got there, and all of a sudden, like the lineup is all the way back, like all the way in the main entrance. I'm like, okay, something's changed now in Israel. People are coming back, and and when I talk to the lawyers there, and you're like, yeah, people are coming back, investors are coming back. So hopefully for them, things are starting to come back a little bit.
Yeah,
that's amazing. We like to ask this question to everyone, and you can pick from special situations, restructuring, even real estate a little bit. What is one, and law, of course, what is one particular skill or experience that pertains to the field that you are in that you think applies to everyone across either lawyer, doctor, or accountant?
Or every other industry.
Or every other industry, and ghostwriters included.
I think that at the end of the day, it really comes down to judgment. When I look at people and try to assess, it's not so much what do they know, but how do they act in situations that requires them to have judgment, right? Where there isn't an obvious answer, and I think that applies to almost any any field. You can be the best doctor in the world, right? But if you don't have good judgment, then things go badly. And same with lawyers and accountants or investment bankers or anyone else. And at the end of the day, I think that's not an easily learned skill, but it's something that is crucial. It's I think that you have to be able to internalize, not be so quick to think things through, and to have good judgment.
That's great. And that's the first we've ever heard that as the skill. That's incredible. Do you have any final takeaways as a Jewish professional in the workplace you want to leave our audience with?
Look, I think that on the one hand, it's a bit of a we're in a different environment that it's almost coming full circle. When I started my career, it was not so simple to wear a yarmulke in the field and in my field, and going to court, and most people, myself included, came to the conclusion that we couldn't really do that. And of course, after a number of years, the tide changed, and I would say most people coming into law, chose to wear their yarmulkes and so on. And I think we're getting into a time now where that's starting to potentially be an issue. I think my hope, I'll leave it on a hopeful note, is that that in this time, people stick with it. Even though our old guys, we're kind of stuck where we are, but I think that, and I will say that one important thing is when you're in a workplace and you are part of a visible minority like we are, you are representing, whether you like it or not, you are representing that minority, and you need to think about that. And you need to think about it in terms of how you relate to people you work with about Shabbos and Yontiv, and not just say, I'm out of here, you guys deal with the mess, right? You got to be responsible and give and make sure people understand and say, look, I'm going to be offline. I'll be right back online the moment after, and I'll take the responsibility and I'll handle the stuff from there so that there's a give and take. So, and I think you have to be careful as to how you act, because people are going, you are representing at a certain point, at some point, you are representing your community.
Thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time. Thank you so much for sharing your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate you blessing us with your presence in Washington Heights. Thank you so much, and special donuts.
Can I get my parking validated?
Yeah.
Yeah, that is ridiculous. I'm upset about that.
Thank you to all our listeners. Again, thank you to JB, thank you to Ashley, thank you to Josh, and thank you to Charles for all the editing. And thank you most to our listeners. You guys are the ones that drive this podcast. We will catch you guys on the next one.